By the first quarter of 2026, artificial intelligence no longer feels like an emerging technology. It feels infrastructural. The biggest change isn't a breakthrough model or a dramatic public reveal. It's normalization. AI systems are now embedded quietly across workflows that once required specialized human attention, not as replacements, but as default collaborators. This quarter marks the point where using AI stops being a conscious decision and becomes an ambient condition of modern work. On the technical side, we see the widespread deployment of hybrid reasoning models, systems that combine large language models with symbolic reasoning layers, long-term memory modules, and domain-specific tool chains. These models are not dramatically larger than their 2024 to 2025 predecessors. Instead, they are more structured. They plan in steps, verify their own outputs against constraints, and route tasks internally between subsystems optimized for logic, language, perception, and retrieval. A key shift is persistent context. AI systems now retain durable memory across sessions, not just user preferences, but evolving representations of goals, constraints, and past decisions. This transforms them from reactive tools into longitudinal assistants. Engineers notice it first. Debugging sessions span weeks rather than hours. Design discussions pick up where they left off. Architectural trade-offs are remembered, not re-explained. In scientific research, AI copilots are increasingly used for hypothesis refinement rather than discovery. The models ingest prior literature, simulate parameter spaces, and suggest which experiments are most informative, not merely most likely to succeed. This subtly reshapes research culture. The bottleneck moves away from idea generation and toward experimental execution and validation. Labs that can move fast physically gain an advantage over those that only think fast digitally. Economically, the most visible effect in Q1 2026 is not unemployment, but task erosion. Jobs remain, titles remain, salaries remain. But the internal composition of work shifts. Writing, summarizing, coding boilerplate, compliance documentation, first-pass legal review, and routine analysis are now largely AI-mediated. Humans increasingly supervise, edit, and arbitrate rather than originate. This produces a strange psychological effect. Many workers feel simultaneously more productive and less essential. Output increases, but authorship becomes diffuse. The sense of personal craftsmanship erodes in white-collar professions long before any mass layoffs occur. Education systems begin to feel the pressure. Universities quietly adjust assessment methods, placing more weight on oral examinations, in-person labs, and process documentation. Not because AI use is forbidden, but because it is assumed. The question is no longer did a human write this, but does the human understand what this does? Governments, meanwhile, lag behind the lived reality. Regulatory frameworks discussed in 2024 and 2025 arrive just as the underlying systems have already evolved past their assumptions. Early AI audits focus on transparency and bias reporting, but struggle to address emergent behavior in systems composed of many interacting models. Socially, trust begins to fragment, not dramatically but quietly. People grow accustomed to AI-generated text, voices, and images, yet become more skeptical of everything. Authenticity shifts from "is this real?" to "is this accountable?" Systems that can cite sources, show reasoning traces, and expose uncertainty gain legitimacy over those that simply sound confident. By the end of Q1 2026, it becomes clear that society has crossed a threshold without ceremony. AI is no longer something we test, is something we coordinate with. And the next quarters will no longer be about adoption, but about dependency. By the second quarter of 2026, the role of AI shifts in a subtle but consequential way. The systems themselves are not radically different from those deployed just months earlier. What changes is how they are used. Organizations stop asking AI to help with individual tasks and begin asking it to manage entire processes end-to-end. This is the quarter where orchestration becomes the dominant technical theme. Instead of a single model responding to prompts, companies deploy agentic systems, collections of specialized AI components that coordinate with one another over time. One agent monitors incoming data, another plans responses, a third executes actions through software APIs, while a fourth evaluates outcomes and adjusts strategy. These systems operate continuously, not conversationally. They wake up before humans do, and continue working long after offices close. From a systems engineering perspective, this introduces a new class of complexity. Traditional software is deterministic. Given the same input, it produces the same output. These AI-driven process managers are probabilistic and adaptive. They learn not just from data, but from feedback loops embedded in real operations, customer behavior, supply delays, regulatory responses, and human corrections. In logistics and supply chain management, this becomes immediately visible. AI systems now forecast demand, negotiate vendor orders, reroute shipments, and adjust inventory thresholds autonomously. Human managers intervene only when performance deviates outside acceptable bounds. The result is not perfection, but resilience. Systems recover from disruptions faster than before, even if they cannot fully explain how they arrived at their decisions. In finance and accounting, quarterly closes accelerate. AI reconciles transactions, flags anomalies, drafts reports, and simulates alternative accounting treatments before humans ever open a spreadsheet. Auditors begin reviewing process logic rather than individual entries. The focus shifts from "is this number correct" to "is this system behaving within acceptable risk parameters?" The scientific world experiences a quieter but profound change. AI systems now manage experimental pipelines. They schedule instrument time, prioritize experiments based on expected information gain, adjust parameters mid-run, and archive results with contextual metadata. Researchers increasingly describe their role as steering rather than doing. Discovery becomes less about flashes of insight and more about navigating vast, algorithmically explored possibility spaces. This quarter also marks the first serious friction between automation and organizational culture. Middle management feels the pressure most acutely. Many of their traditional responsibilities, coordination, scheduling, status tracking, optimization, are now performed better by machines. The human role shifts toward interpretation, ethics, and conflict resolution, but not all institutions are prepared for this transition. Psychologically, workers encounter a new tension: delegation without understanding. AI-managed processes deliver results, but the causal chains are opaque. People begin to trust outcomes they cannot fully explain. This creates efficiency, but also unease. When something goes wrong, responsibility feels diffuse. The system did what it was designed to do, yet no individual feels fully accountable. Regulators begin to notice. Early policy discussions in Q2 2026 move away from model-level oversight toward system-level accountability. The concern is no longer whether a single AI is biased, but whether a network of interacting systems can drift into harmful equilibria over time. However, enforcement tools remain blunt, often relying on reporting requirements that lag real-world operations by months. Education and training respond slowly. Professional programs begin emphasizing systems thinking, human-in-the-loop design, and failure analysis. Knowing how to prompt an AI is no longer impressive. Knowing how to constrain one becomes valuable. Socially, the public remains largely unaware of the depth of this shift. Services feel smoother. Delays shrink. Errors are rarer, though not eliminated. What is not visible is how much decision-making has already migrated away from human intuition and into statistical optimization. By the end of Q2 2026, a line has been crossed. AI is no longer just helping people work faster. It is quietly deciding how work itself is organized. And once processes, not tasks, are automated, reversing that dependence becomes far more difficult. By the third quarter of 2026, the most important change brought by AI is no longer speed or scale. is closure. For the first time, large portions of knowledge work become self-contained loops. Information is gathered by AI, processed by AI, acted upon by AI, and evaluated again by AI. Humans remain present, but increasingly outside the loop rather than inside it. Technically, this is enabled by the maturation of evaluation models. These are systems designed not to generate content, but to judge it. They score outputs for coherence, correctness, novelty, compliance, and usefulness. When paired with generative models, they create feedback cycles that resemble a simplified scientific method: propose, test, revise, repeat, without human intervention at each step. In software development, this becomes immediately apparent. AI systems now generate code, run unit tests, refactor failing components, rerun benchmarks, and deploy updates to staging environments autonomously. Human developers review diffs and approve releases, but the iteration cycle itself is machine-driven. Productivity metrics spike, but so does abstraction. Fewer engineers understand entire systems end-to-end. In scientific research, AI-driven literature synthesis reaches a new plateau. Models no longer just summarize papers. They reconcile contradictions, identify methodological weaknesses, and propose unifying frameworks across fields. This accelerates convergence in mature disciplines while quietly marginalizing unconventional approaches that do not fit existing data structures. The risk is subtle. Closed loops optimize for what can be measured. Novel ideas that lack immediate validation signals are filtered out early. Over time, this can create a form of epistemic smoothing where knowledge advances efficiently but conservatively, favoring incremental gains over conceptual leaps. Corporate decision-making mirrors this pattern. Strategy documents are drafted, stress-tested, and revised by AI systems using internal data and market simulations. Executives increasingly approve decisions that feel well-supported, even if they cannot fully articulate the underlying logic. Confidence becomes statistical rather than intuitive. This quarter also sees the rise of synthetic benchmarks. Instead of evaluating AI systems on static test sets, organizations deploy AI-generated environments that evolve over time. Models are trained against other models, evaluated by other models, and optimized for performance within these artificial ecosystems. While this accelerates development, it further distances system behavior from human expectations. Social trust begins to strain in new ways. People encounter explanations that are technically correct but emotionally hollow. AI-generated reasoning is clean, well-structured, and persuasive, but often lacks the messiness that signals human judgment. Over time, this creates a paradox. Outputs are more reliable, yet less trusted. Education systems struggle to adapt. Students use AI not just to answer questions, but to determine which questions matter. Learning becomes navigational rather than exploratory. Educators notice that students can produce excellent work while retaining a shallower internal model of the subject. Understanding becomes externalized. Regulators and ethicists begin to articulate a new concern: decision atrophy. As AI systems handle more evaluation and judgment, human capacity to do so independently weakens. This is not enforced dependency, but voluntary delegation. People defer because it is easier, faster, and usually correct. By the end of Q3 2026, society begins to realize that AI is no longer just a tool that amplifies intelligence. It is a system that increasingly decides what counts as knowledge. And once knowledge creation itself becomes a closed loop, the question is no longer whether AI is aligned with human values, but whether humans remain aligned with their own. By the fourth quarter of 2026, something changes in the numbers. For much of the previous 2 years, AI's impact has been visible anecdotally but elusive in macroeconomic data. Productivity gains were reported, but inconsistently. Employment remained resilient. Wages showed little disruption. The story felt unresolved. In Q4 2026, the lag ends. Economic indicators begin to show clear, statistically significant shifts, not because AI suddenly accelerates, but because its effects finally aggregate. Thousands of small efficiencies, quietly compounding across industries, become impossible to ignore. Total factor productivity rises in sectors dominated by information processing, finance, insurance, logistics, legal services, software, and scientific research. Not dramatically, but persistently. Quarter-over-quarter gains appear modest, yet they are unusually broad-based. Economists note that the improvement is not driven by capital investment in traditional machinery, but by intangible systems, models, workflows, and algorithmic coordination. At the firm level, margins widen. Companies that successfully integrated AI-driven process automation earlier in the year outperform peers that delayed adoption. This creates a widening gap not between industries, but within them. The best-run firms pull away. The median stagnates. Labor markets react unevenly. Headcount remains stable, but role compression accelerates. One person now performs the output once associated with several specialized positions. Job descriptions become vague, emphasizing adaptability and oversight rather than specific skills. Career ladders flatten, with fewer intermediate rungs. This produces a quiet anxiety. Workers are still employed, but advancement feels uncertain. Raises become harder to justify when output is mediated by systems no individual fully controls. Performance reviews increasingly evaluate judgment, collaboration, and system stewardship rather than raw production. Financial markets respond cautiously. Investors reward companies that demonstrate AI leverage, but valuations remain grounded. The memory of previous tech hype cycles tempers enthusiasm. Analysts focus less on AI exposure and more on execution maturity, how deeply AI is embedded into operations rather than how prominently it is advertised. Governments begin to notice fiscal effects. Tax revenues rise modestly in high-productivity sectors, even as wage growth remains muted. This creates a policy tension. Productivity is improving, but household income is not keeping pace. Early discussions of redistribution mechanisms re-emerge, not framed as AI policy, but as labor market stabilization. Education to employment pipelines strain. Graduates enter workplaces where baseline competence is assumed to include AI fluency. Those who lack it struggle, not because they cannot learn, but because onboarding time is no longer tolerated. Firms expect immediate leverage from new hires. Meanwhile, small businesses face a different reality. AI tools lower barriers to entry, allowing lean teams to compete with larger incumbents. But success depends on integration skill, not access. The gap widens between those who can orchestrate AI systems and those who treat them as add-ons. Culturally, the narrative shifts. AI is no longer discussed primarily as a future disruptor or ethical dilemma. It is discussed as a productivity regime, a new baseline that reshapes expectations of speed, accuracy, and responsiveness. By the end of Q4 2026, the economy reflects what technologists have known for some time. AI has not caused a shock. It has caused a rebalancing, one that favors systems over individuals, coordination over creativity, and quiet leverage over visible labor. And as the calendar turns, society enters 2027 with a growing realization. The easy gains are over. What comes next will be harder, slower, and far more consequential. As 2027 begins, the tone around artificial intelligence shifts for the first time from adaptation to containment. The technology has not stalled. Models continue to improve incrementally, better memory handling, tighter reasoning loops, more reliable tool use. But the defining feature of Q1 2027 is not technical acceleration. It is institutional response. Governments, universities, professional bodies, and large organizations begin to assert boundaries around systems that have quietly become indispensable. This quarter marks the early phase of AI governance moving from principle to practice. Regulators stop focusing on model size and training data and instead target deployment contexts. New rules emphasize auditability, human override mechanisms, and documented chains of responsibility for automated decisions. The question regulators ask is no longer what is this AI capable of, but who is accountable when this system acts over time. From a technical perspective, this drives a surge in interpretability infrastructure. Companies invest in tools that log model decisions, surface uncertainty estimates, and expose intermediate reasoning steps. These systems do not fully explain AI behavior, but they make it legible enough to assign blame, responsibility, and compliance. Interpretability becomes less about curiosity and more about liability. In critical sectors, healthcare, energy, finance, transportation, AI systems are increasingly required to operate in bounded autonomy modes. They can propose actions, simulate outcomes, and execute within predefined thresholds, but must escalate to human review when uncertainty exceeds set limits. This introduces friction, slowing some processes while stabilizing others. Universities respond in parallel. Degrees begin to formalize around human, AI systems engineering rather than standalone computer science or data science. Students are trained to design workflows where humans remain meaningfully in the loop, not as token overseers, but as value-aligned decision-makers. Assessment shifts toward long-form reasoning, system critique, and failure analysis. Professional organizations react defensively. Legal associations, medical boards, and engineering societies issue new standards defining acceptable AI use. These are framed as ethical safeguards, but they also function as labor protections, ways to preserve professional judgment in an era of algorithmic efficiency. Corporations face internal resistance. Employees push back against opaque systems that evaluate performance or allocate work without explanation. Trust erodes when AI systems feel like silent managers rather than transparent tools. In response, some firms slow deployment, trading short-term efficiency for organizational cohesion. Public discourse grows sharper. Media coverage moves away from novelty and toward power dynamics. The question becomes, who benefits from automation and who absorbs its risks? While mass unemployment has not arrived, a sense of structural imbalance becomes harder to dismiss. Technologically, this quarter also sees a subtle but important shift in model design philosophy. Developers begin optimizing not just for capability, but for controllability. Systems are trained to ask for clarification, defer decisions, and surface uncertainty explicitly. This makes them feel less magical and more trustworthy. By the end of Q1 2027, a new equilibrium begins to form. AI is no longer treated as an unstoppable force or a neutral tool. It is recognized as an institutional actor, one that must be shaped, constrained, and negotiated with. The coming quarters will test whether societies can govern systems they increasingly depend on, without stifling the very productivity gains they now rely upon. By the second quarter of 2027, it becomes clear that artificial intelligence is no longer evolving along a single global trajectory. What had once looked like a broadly shared technological wave begins to fracture into regional systems, shaped as much by politics, regulation, and culture as by engineering. The idea of a universally accessible, globally uniform AI ecosystem quietly dissolves. From a technical standpoint, the models themselves remain similar in architecture. Transformer-based cores, multimodal inputs, agentic layers, and tool-using subsystems are still the norm. The divergence emerges in constraints, access, and alignment priorities. Some regions emphasize maximum capability. Their systems are optimized for speed, scale, and competitive advantage, with fewer restrictions on autonomy. These models are deeply integrated into industrial planning, infrastructure management, and national research initiatives. The goal is acceleration, economic, scientific, and strategic. Other regions prioritize control and accountability. Their AI systems are slower, more interpretable, and more tightly sandboxed. Deployment requires extensive documentation, human oversight, and compliance checks. Innovation continues, but along narrower channels. Reliability and public trust are treated as strategic assets rather than trade-offs. This divergence reshapes global collaboration. Multinational corporations are forced to maintain multiple AI stacks to operate across jurisdictions. A model acceptable in one region may be non-compliant in another. Engineering teams fragment, maintaining parallel systems that share concepts but not code. Scientific collaboration becomes more complex. Data sharing agreements strain under incompatible governance regimes. Joint research projects slow as teams navigate differing standards for model training, experimentation, and publication. The friction does not stop progress, but it dampens it. Geopolitically, AI becomes an explicit component of national strategy. Governments invest in domestic compute infrastructure, talent pipelines, and sovereign datasets. Dependence on foreign AI systems is framed as a strategic vulnerability. The language of resilience replaces the language of openness. Cybersecurity concerns intensify. AI systems managing critical processes become high-value targets. Defensive models are deployed to monitor other models, creating recursive security architectures. This adds robustness, but also complexity. Failures become harder to diagnose and attribute. At the societal level, citizens begin to experience AI differently depending on where they live. In some regions, AI services are fast, expansive, and deeply personalized but opaque. In others, they are constrained, explainable, and cautious, but sometimes frustratingly limited. Public attitudes diverge accordingly. Economically, the fragmentation creates inefficiencies. Duplication of effort increases costs. Smaller firms struggle to navigate regulatory mosaics. Large players adapt more easily, reinforcing their dominance. Innovation clusters form, but are less globally connected than before. Technologists express quiet concern. Fragmentation slows shared learning and increases the risk of divergent failure modes. A system optimized aggressively in one region may behave unpredictably when interacting with more constrained systems elsewhere. By the end of Q2 2027, the vision of a single, shared AI future fades. In its place emerges a plurality of AI regimes, each reflecting the values and priorities of the societies that built them. The next challenge will not be how to advance AI, but how to coexist with versions of it that evolve in fundamentally different directions. By the third quarter of 2027, the question surrounding AI is no longer what machines can do. It is what humans are still expected to do. This quarter marks a turning point in how societies define skill, competence, and expertise in an environment where intelligent systems are always present. The change is not abrupt. There are no announcements or reforms that capture it cleanly. Instead, expectations quietly recalibrate across education, employment, and culture. Technically, AI systems now operate with a level of contextual awareness that allows them to anticipate user needs across domains. They infer intent, track long-term objectives, and adapt their communication style to individual preferences. This makes them feel less like tools and more like collaborators. Over time, people stop explicitly asking for help. They assume assistance will arrive when needed. In the workplace, proficiency shifts away from execution and toward judgment under uncertainty. Humans are valued not for generating options. AI does that effortlessly, but for selecting among them when trade-offs are ambiguous, values conflict, or data is incomplete. The ability to say no to a statistically optimal recommendation becomes a core professional skill. This is especially visible in medicine, engineering, and public policy. AI systems present rank diagnoses, designs, and policy outcomes with confidence intervals and risk profiles. Human practitioners are responsible for choosing paths that align with ethical, social, or emotional considerations the models cannot fully internalize. Education systems begin to adapt more visibly. Curricula emphasize systems literacy, critical reasoning, and epistemic humility. Students are trained to interrogate AI outputs, identify blind spots, and understand the limits of statistical inference. Memorization and procedural mastery recede further in importance. However, a generational divide emerges. Those who grew up before pervasive AI retain strong internal models of problem solving. Younger cohorts, accustomed to constant assistance, excel at navigation and coordination, but sometimes struggle with deep, unaided reasoning. This is not a deficit so much as a reallocation of cognitive effort, but it changes how expertise manifests. Culturally, authorship and originality are redefined. Creative work increasingly involves curation, direction, and synthesis rather than raw creation. The line between human and machine contribution blurs, leading to debates over credit, ownership, and authenticity. Audiences adapt, valuing resonance over provenance. There is also a growing awareness of cognitive dependence. People notice discomfort when AI systems are unavailable. Tasks feel heavier. Decisions feel slower. This prompts a renewed interest in maintaining human capability, not out of nostalgia, but as a hedge against over-reliance. Organizations respond by formalizing human-in-the-loop rituals. Key decisions require explicit human sign-off, not because AI is untrusted, but because responsibility must remain embodied. These rituals serve both practical and psychological functions, reinforcing human agency. By the end of Q3 2027, a quiet consensus emerges. Human value no longer lies in being smarter or faster than machines. It lies in being situated, accountable, and meaning-aware. The coming quarters will test whether societies can preserve these qualities as AI systems continue to integrate ever more deeply into daily life. By the fourth quarter of 2027, artificial intelligence is no longer viewed as an external force acting on society. It is understood as an internal dependency, woven so deeply into infrastructure, institutions, and cognition that its absence becomes difficult to imagine. This quarter marks the point where dependency stops being theoretical and becomes operationally visible. The trigger is not a single catastrophic failure, but a series of small, compounding disruptions. A regional AI service outage delays logistics coordination. A model update subtly alters decision thresholds in financial systems. A security patch temporarily disables autonomous scheduling across multiple sectors. None of these events cause collapse, but together they reveal how much modern systems now assume continuous AI availability. From a technical standpoint, this leads to increased focus on graceful degradation. Engineers design systems that can fall back to simpler modes when AI components fail. Manual overrides, once symbolic, are tested seriously. The results are mixed. In many cases, the human procedures exist only on paper. Skills have atrophied. Response times lengthen. In critical infrastructure, energy grids, transportation networks, healthcare logistics, redundancy planning becomes a priority. AI systems are paired with independent verification layers and conservative safety constraints. This improves robustness, but adds latency and cost. Efficiency is traded for resilience. At the same time, AI monitoring AI becomes standard. Metasystems watch for drift, anomalous behavior, and cascading failures. This recursive oversight stabilizes operations but deepens dependency. Human operators increasingly manage interfaces between automated systems rather than the systems themselves. Economically, firms begin pricing dependency risk. Insurance products emerge to cover AI-induced disruptions. Premiums reflect not just technical reliability, but organizational preparedness. Companies that cannot demonstrate human fallback capacity face higher costs. Socially, a new form of anxiety surfaces, not fear of AI domination, but fear of AI absence. People realize how much of daily life depends on invisible coordination. Scheduling, navigation, communication, and decision support have become ambient. When they falter, the friction is immediate. This sparks cultural reflection. Writers, educators, and technologists debate what capabilities should remain human-maintained, even if they are inefficient. There is renewed interest in basic skills, not as romantic throwbacks, but as resilience practices. Politically, dependency reframes policy discussions. The question is no longer whether to regulate AI, but how to ensure continuity under failure. National resilience strategies begin to include AI continuity planning alongside energy and food security. By the end of Q4 2027, society reaches a sober realization. AI has not replaced human systems. It has become the scaffolding they rest upon. And any scaffolding, no matter how advanced, introduces new failure modes the structure itself must learn to live with. As 2028 begins, the most consequential effect of artificial intelligence is no longer its raw capability. It is who gets access to the best versions of it. By the first quarter of 2028, a clear stratification emerges between tiers of AI systems. At the top are highly capable, well-resourced models integrated deeply into corporate, governmental, and elite institutional workflows. These systems have superior reasoning depth, persistent memory, domain-specific tuning, and privileged data access. At lower tiers are general-purpose AI tools still powerful but constrained in autonomy, context, and adaptability. Technically, the difference is not just model size. It is integration density. High-tier systems are embedded into proprietary datasets, specialized tool chains, and long-running agent networks. They learn continuously from real-world feedback unavailable to public models. This creates compounding advantages that are difficult to replicate. Economically, this stratification amplifies existing inequalities. Organizations with access to premium AI systems operate with greater foresight, efficiency, and strategic coherence. They anticipate market shifts earlier, allocate resources more effectively, and absorb shocks with less disruption. Smaller firms and under-resourced institutions struggle to keep pace, even when using similar-looking tools. In the labor market, this divides workers not by education level, but by cognitive leverage. Individuals supported by high-quality AI systems outperform peers with equivalent skills but inferior tools. Career trajectories diverge accordingly. The value of human labor becomes increasingly coupled to the quality of the intelligence layer surrounding it. Education mirrors this pattern. Elite institutions deploy advanced AI tutors, curriculum designers, and assessment systems that adapt continuously to student progress. Learning becomes deeply personalized. Elsewhere, education relies on more generic tools with limited context. The gap in learning outcomes widens, not because of talent, but because of feedback quality. Public discourse begins to frame AI access as a form of infrastructure inequality, akin to broadband or electricity in earlier eras. But unlike physical infrastructure, AI quality is harder to standardize or regulate. Capabilities evolve rapidly, and access is often mediated through private platforms. Governments respond unevenly. Some invest in public AI systems designed to provide baseline cognitive services, education support, legal guidance, healthcare triage. Others rely on market forces, trusting competition to diffuse benefits. The outcomes diverge sharply. Socially, resentment grows quietly. People sense that some individuals and institutions operate with a kind of amplified intelligence that feels unreachable. This is not a visible class divide, but a functional one. Decision-making speed, clarity, and confidence become markers of status. Technologically, efforts to democratize AI continue, but face structural limits. Open models improve, but struggle to match the integration depth and continuous learning of closed systems. The gap narrows at the surface and widens underneath. By the end of Q1 2028, the question facing society shifts again. It is no longer whether AI will change opportunity. It is whether unequal access to intelligence itself will become a defining feature of the next era. By the second quarter of 2028, a noticeable gap opens between how society operates and how it understands itself. Technologically, AI systems are now deeply embedded across decision-making layers: economic planning, scientific research, education, logistics, and governance. They coordinate smoothly, adapt continuously, and handle complexity beyond unaided human cognition. Functionally, the systems work. Culturally, however, language, norms, and institutions lag behind. People continue to describe work, creativity, responsibility, and merit using concepts formed in a pre-AI era. This mismatch creates confusion. Outcomes are achieved, but explanations feel hollow. Success happens, but authorship is unclear. Failure occurs, but accountability is diffuse. In the workplace, performance is increasingly collective and system-mediated, yet evaluations remain individual. Employees struggle to articulate their contributions when results emerge from human-AI collaboration. Traditional incentives misalign with actual value creation, leading to frustration and disengagement. In creative fields, audiences adapt faster than institutions. Consumers accept AI-assisted music, writing, and visual art with little resistance, focusing on emotional resonance rather than origin. Legal frameworks, however, still hinge on authorship, ownership, and originality in ways that no longer map cleanly onto reality. Litigation increases, but clarity does not. Education faces a similar tension. Students learn with AI as a constant companion, yet credentials still attempt to certify individual mastery. Exams measure isolated cognition in a world where cognition is increasingly distributed. The result is a quiet erosion of trust in signaling systems like degrees and certifications. Technically, AI systems now include metacultural models, systems trained to adapt tone, framing, and explanation to different social contexts. These models help smooth interactions, but they also mask the depth of change. AI makes itself legible to human culture without culture fully understanding what has changed. Politically, debates become more performative. Policy discussions reference jobs, growth, and innovation, while underlying dynamics involve system-level coordination and intelligence amplification. The public senses a disconnect, fueling skepticism and polarization. Psychologically, individuals experience a subtle identity strain. Skills they once took pride in are now augmented or eclipsed. Competence feels contextual rather than intrinsic. This does not produce crisis, but does produce disorientation. By the end of Q2 2028, a realization sets in. AI has not simply changed how society functions. It has changed what it means to function, while cultural narratives remain anchored in an earlier world. The coming quarters will explore whether societies can update their self-understanding fast enough to keep pace with the systems they have built. By the third quarter of 2028, the strain between technological reality and social structure becomes difficult to ignore. In response, societies begin, haltingly, to experiment with new forms of social agreement. These are not sweeping reforms or ideological revolutions. They are pragmatic adaptations designed to stabilize systems that no longer behave as expected under old assumptions. The core issue is no longer employment alone. It is distribution of agency. AI systems now contribute meaningfully to value creation across nearly every sector. Productivity continues to rise, but the link between individual effort and economic reward weakens. Traditional labor contracts struggle to account for outcomes produced by human-AI collectives. Technically, this quarter sees the maturation of contribution tracking systems. These frameworks attempt to quantify human input within AI-mediated processes, decision oversight, ethical judgment, creative direction, and risk acceptance. The metrics are imperfect, but they represent an effort to re-anchor responsibility and reward. Some governments pilot new compensation models. These include expanded wage insurance, reduced working hours without proportional pay cuts, and baseline income supplements tied to national productivity rather than employment status. These are framed not as AI policies, but as economic resilience measures. Corporations adapt unevenly. Forward-looking firms redefine roles around stewardship, interpretation, and accountability. Others cling to outdated performance models, increasing burnout and turnover. Organizational culture becomes a competitive advantage. Education institutions begin issuing capability portfolios instead of static credentials. These portfolios document how individuals collaborate with AI systems, manage uncertainty, and exercise judgment over time. Employers respond cautiously, but interest grows. Social norms shift subtly. Status becomes less about busyness and more about discernment. People who can frame problems well, ask the right questions, and set meaningful constraints gain influence. Loud productivity is replaced by quiet leverage. There's also resistance. Some groups reject AI-mediated systems altogether, seeking autonomy through low-tech or human-only environments. These movements remain marginal but visible, serving as cultural counterweights. By the end of Q3 2028, it becomes clear that society is renegotiating its foundations, not in theory, but in practice. The old social contracts are not torn up. They are slowly being rewritten in the margins. By the fourth quarter of 2028, attention shifts away from screens. After years of reshaping digital processes, artificial intelligence begins to exert its most visible influence in the physical world: infrastructure, manufacturing, energy systems, agriculture, and the built environment. This is not the arrival of humanoid robots or dramatic automation spectacles. It is quieter, more consequential, and far more distributed. Technically, the key enabler is the maturation of world modeling systems. AI no longer relies solely on static datasets or narrow sensor feeds. It maintains continuously updated internal representations of physical environments, factories, power grids, cities, and ecosystems. These models integrate real-time data with predictive simulation, allowing systems to plan actions that account for physical constraints, uncertainty, and long-term effects. In manufacturing, AI-managed facilities adjust production dynamically based on material availability, energy prices, and demand forecasts. Machines reconfigure workflows without human scheduling. Human technicians focus on maintenance, safety, and exception handling. Downtime shrinks. Throughput stabilizes. Energy systems change noticeably. AI optimizes grid balance across renewables, storage, and conventional generation. Demand response becomes proactive rather than reactive. Blackouts decline in frequency, but when they occur, recovery is faster and more localized. Energy infrastructure feels less brittle. Agriculture experiences a similar shift. AI-guided systems manage irrigation, fertilization, and harvesting at fine spatial and temporal scales. Inputs are reduced. Yields become more predictable. Farmers transition from manual decision-making to strategic oversight, though dependence on system reliability grows. Urban environments adapt unevenly. Traffic flows, public transit, and maintenance schedules are optimized continuously. Cities with integrated sensing and governance benefit most. Others struggle with partial adoption, where legacy systems and AI coordination clash. The social response is mixed. Physical world AI feels more real and therefore more political. Infrastructure decisions are visible. When AI-managed systems fail, consequences are tangible. Public tolerance for opacity decreases. Demands for explainability grow louder. Regulatory frameworks adapt slowly. Safety certification processes, designed for static systems, struggle to evaluate adaptive ones. Engineers develop conservative deployment strategies, limiting autonomy in high-risk contexts. Progress continues, but cautiously. By the end of Q4 2028, AI is no longer primarily associated with information. It is associated with control of matter, energy, and space. The implications are profound. Mistakes carry physical costs. Success reshapes landscapes. And as AI moves deeper into the material world, the stakes of alignment, resilience, and governance rise sharply. By the first quarter of 2029, artificial intelligence encounters constraints it cannot abstract away. After years of rapid expansion across digital and physical domains, the limiting factors are no longer algorithms or data, but energy, materials, and environmental tolerance. AI development enters a phase where progress is shaped as much by planetary boundaries as by computational ingenuity. Technically, this quarter highlights the growing cost of large-scale inference. While training new frontier models slows compared to earlier years, deployment demand explodes. Billions of daily inferences across physical systems, grids, factories, transportation, agriculture, consume significant energy. Optimization efforts shift away from raw capability toward efficiency per decision. Researchers focus on smaller, specialized models coordinated through hierarchical systems. Instead of a single large model doing everything, many lightweight models handle local tasks, escalating to larger systems only when necessary. This reduces energy use, latency, and hardware strain. Hardware innovation accelerates. Purpose-built AI accelerators emphasize energy efficiency, neuromorphic principles, and on-device inference. Data centers are redesigned around heat recovery, load balancing, and co-location with renewable energy sources. Compute becomes a managed resource rather than an assumed constant. Environmentally, scrutiny intensifies. The carbon footprint of AI systems becomes measurable, regulated, and politically salient. Companies are required to disclose energy usage and emissions associated with AI deployment, not just training. Public tolerance for wasteful computation declines. This drives a shift in incentives. AI systems that can demonstrably reduce net environmental impact by optimizing energy use, reducing waste, or improving resource allocation receive preferential regulatory treatment and investment. Capability alone is no longer enough. At the societal level, this reframes the AI narrative. The technology is no longer seen as immaterial or infinitely scalable. It is recognized as an industrial system with ecological consequences. Debates about growth, efficiency, and sustainability converge. By the end of Q1 2029, the trajectory of AI changes again. The question is no longer how powerful systems can become. It is how efficient, restrained, and sustainable they must be to persist. By the second quarter of 2029, artificial intelligence crosses a line that governments once insisted would remain firmly human. It begins to shape policy itself. This does not take the form of autonomous rule or machine-written laws passed wholesale. Instead, AI systems become deeply embedded in the design, simulation, and evaluation of public policy. Governance becomes increasingly computational. Not because leaders abdicate responsibility, but because complexity has outgrown unaided human planning. Technically, governments deploy large-scale policy simulation systems. These models integrate economic data, demographic trends, infrastructure constraints, environmental limits, and behavioral assumptions to forecast policy outcomes across decades. Thousands of scenarios are evaluated for each proposal. Trade-offs are quantified with unprecedented granularity. Legislators and civil servants use these systems to stress-test tax changes, housing policy, healthcare reforms, and climate interventions. Policies that once relied on ideological framing are now accompanied by probabilistic impact distributions and risk maps. Debate shifts from what should we do to which failure modes are we willing to accept. This changes political dynamics. Evidence becomes harder to ignore, but also easier to manipulate. Different assumptions fed into the same models produce divergent outcomes. Control over inputs, weights, and objectives becomes a new locus of power. Transparency becomes a central demand. Citizens and watchdog organizations push for access to the models shaping policy decisions. Governments respond cautiously, balancing openness against the risk of gaming or misinterpretation. A new class of public experts emerges, interpreters of computational governance. At the same time, AI begins to manage policy execution. Welfare distribution, infrastructure maintenance, emergency response, and regulatory enforcement are increasingly coordinated by adaptive systems. Human oversight remains, but day-to-day operation becomes algorithmic. This improves efficiency but introduces legitimacy concerns. When outcomes are optimized statistically, individual hardship can feel invisible. Policymakers grapple with how to encode fairness, dignity, and moral judgment into systems designed for optimization. By the end of Q2 2029, governance feels different. Decisions are more informed but less intuitive. Outcomes are more consistent but less personal. AI has not replaced politics. It has changed the terrain on which politics occurs. By the third quarter of 2029, artificial intelligence reaches a social inflection point. Not because it has failed, but because it has succeeded too thoroughly. AI systems now shape outcomes in finance, infrastructure, healthcare, education, and governance with measurable effectiveness. Crises are predicted earlier. Resources are allocated more efficiently. Errors are fewer than in purely human-managed systems. On paper, the systems work. And yet, public trust begins to plateau, and in some places, quietly erode. This quarter becomes defined by a growing tension between performance and legitimacy. People increasingly sense that important decisions are being made around them rather than with them. AI-mediated governance delivers statistically better outcomes, but explanations feel abstract, technical, and emotionally distant. When an AI-optimized policy disadvantages a community, the response is often, "The model says this is optimal." That answer satisfies analysts, but not those affected. Technically, the systems are behaving as designed. Optimization targets are met. Constraints are respected. Risk is minimized. But the values encoded in these systems, efficiency, stability, long-term averages, do not always align with lived human experience, which is local, uneven, and emotional. This mismatch fuels resistance. Not violent or revolutionary resistance, but procedural resistance. Citizens challenge decisions through legal systems, public comment processes, and institutional slowdowns. They demand human review not because they expect different outcomes, but because they want recognition. Being heard becomes as important as being helped. In some regions, human-first mandates are introduced. Certain classes of decisions, school closures, zoning changes, healthcare prioritization, are required to include explicit human judgment, even when AI recommendations are strong. This reduces efficiency, but restores a sense of agency. Technologists respond by improving explainability interfaces. AI systems generate narratives alongside recommendations, translating statistical reasoning into human-scale stories. These explanations help, but they also reveal how thin the line is between interpretation and persuasion. A new anxiety emerges. Are explanations meant to inform or to pacify? Social movements form around the idea of algorithmic consent, the notion that people should have a say in whether AI systems govern certain aspects of their lives at all. These movements do not reject AI outright. They demand boundaries. Institutions feel the pressure. Governments slow some deployments. Corporations introduce opt-out mechanisms, though often at the cost of degraded service. Efficiency is no longer the only metric that matters. By the end of Q3 2029, it becomes clear that AI has crossed a threshold. It is no longer judged primarily by accuracy or capability. It is judged by whether people accept its authority. And acceptance, unlike performance, cannot be optimized. By the fourth quarter of 2029, societies begin doing something they have largely avoided until now. They start saying no. Not to AI as a whole, but to specific uses of it. This quarter is defined by boundary setting, formal, negotiated, and often uneasy attempts to decide where automation should stop, even when it could go further. The motivation is not technical failure. In most domains, AI systems continue to outperform human-only processes on speed, consistency, and predictive accuracy. The motivation is normative. People begin to articulate that some decisions feel wrong when made primarily by machines, regardless of outcome quality. This leads to the emergence of what policymakers call human-reserved domains. In these areas, criminal sentencing, end-of-life medical decisions, child custody, asylum adjudication, and certain military and security contexts, AI systems are restricted to advisory roles. They can analyze data, surface patterns, and simulate outcomes, but final authority must rest with a named human decision-maker. Technically, this forces a redesign of systems that had been drifting toward full autonomy. Engineers introduce friction deliberately. Decision delays are reintroduced. Confidence thresholds are raised. AI systems are trained to defer more often, even when statistically confident. This feels regressive to some technologists. Efficiency drops. Error rates sometimes increase. But proponents argue that moral legitimacy is not an optimization problem. Corporations follow suit in subtler ways. High-impact internal decisions, mass layoffs, major restructurings, risk transfers are no longer allowed to be triggered automatically by optimization systems. Boards require human deliberation, even if AI simulations dominate the discussion. Education systems also draw lines. Fully AI-driven assessment is curtailed in favor of mixed evaluation models. Students are expected to demonstrate unaided reasoning at key stages, not because AI assistance is forbidden in life, but because society decides those capabilities must remain internally held. Technologically, a new design philosophy takes shape: constraint-first AI. Systems are built around what they are not allowed to do, rather than what they can. Alignment becomes less about teaching values and more about enforcing boundaries. Public response is mixed but stabilizing. Some see these limits as necessary guardrails. Others view them as artificial bottlenecks that entrench inefficiency and human bias. The debate is no longer abstract. It is procedural, legal, and deeply practical. By the end of Q4 2029, something important has happened. AI has not been halted, but it has been contained by choice, not by weakness. And in choosing where to draw the line, societies reveal what they still believe must remain unmistakably human. By the first quarter of 2030, the relationship between humans and artificial intelligence is no longer framed as adoption, disruption, or control. It is framed as coevolution. This marks a conceptual shift. After years of reacting to AI's growing capabilities, integrating it, regulating it, resisting it, societies begin to recognize that humans and intelligent systems are now shaping each other continuously. Neither side is static. Neither can return to an earlier state. Technically, AI systems are now designed with long-term interaction in mind. Models are trained not just to perform tasks, but to adapt alongside users over years. They track changes in human goals, preferences, and constraints, adjusting behavior gradually rather than episodically. This creates a sense of continuity that earlier tools lacked. In professional settings, this deepens collaboration. Engineers, doctors, researchers, and policymakers work with AI systems that have grown with them, learning their judgment patterns, ethical boundaries, and decision styles. Expertise becomes distributed across human, AI pairs rather than individuals. Education systems reflect this shift. Lifelong learning is no longer aspirational rhetoric. AI tutors evolve with learners across decades, reinforcing strengths and compensating for weaknesses. Knowledge is not accumulated once, but maintained continuously through collaboration. Socially, identity adapts. People increasingly define themselves not just by what they know or do, but by how they collaborate with intelligent systems. Skill becomes relational. Mastery includes knowing when to rely on AI and when to override it. There's unease in this intimacy. Long-term coadaptation raises questions about autonomy, influence, and subtle shaping. If an AI system learns how to guide a person's thinking over years, where does assistance end and steering begin? Technologists respond with transparency measures, interaction histories, influence audits, and reset mechanisms. But trust remains personal rather than systemic. People trust their systems more than abstract assurances. By the end of Q1 2030, AI is no longer seen as an external technology. It is understood as a participant in human development. The remaining question is not whether this relationship will deepen, but whether societies can guide it intentionally rather than drifting into it by default. By the second quarter of 2030, artificial intelligence begins operating at a temporal scale that feels unfamiliar to human institutions. Not faster, but longer. AI systems are now routinely used to model decades-long trajectories across climate, demographics, energy, economics, and technological development. What was once the domain of academic foresight studies becomes embedded in everyday decision-making. Governments, corporations, and global institutions begin to plan not just for the next quarter or election cycle, but for the next generation. Technically, this is enabled by advances in multi-scale simulation. AI systems integrate short-term operational data with long-term trend models, allowing them to reason across vastly different timescales. Feedback loops connect immediate decisions to projected outcomes years or decades ahead. Policy choices are evaluated not just for near-term impact, but for their influence on long-run system stability. This transforms planning culture. Infrastructure investments, energy transitions, urban development, and healthcare policy are guided by simulations that reveal delayed consequences and path dependencies. Some options that look attractive in the short term are rejected due to long-term fragility. Others gain support precisely because they reduce systemic risk over decades. The role of human decision-makers shifts again. Rather than choosing among immediate alternatives, leaders are asked to choose which future trajectories to commit to. This is cognitively and politically difficult. Long-term benefits are diffuse. Short-term costs are concrete. Public communication struggles to keep up. Explaining probabilistic futures to populations accustomed to immediate outcomes proves challenging. AI-generated visualizations help, but they also risk oversimplifying deep uncertainty. Technologically, foresight systems face limits. Small errors compound over long horizons. Model assumptions become value-laden. Whose future is optimized, and at what cost, becomes a central ethical question. By the end of Q2 2030, foresight is no longer speculative. It is operational. And once societies can see far ahead, they must decide whether they are willing to act on what they see. By the third quarter of 2030, artificial intelligence has become extraordinarily good at helping societies decide how to do things. What resurfaces now, quietly but persistently, is the question of why. After years of optimization, coordination, foresight, and coevolution, many people begin to feel that something essential has been displaced rather than destroyed. Life is smoother. Systems are more stable. Crises are anticipated earlier. Yet a diffuse sense of existential ambiguity grows. This is not mass despair, nor a rejection of technology. It is a subtler phenomenon, purpose drift. Technically, AI systems now handle most instrumental reasoning. They identify efficient paths, minimize risk, balance trade-offs, and simulate outcomes across time. What they cannot provide is intrinsic meaning. They can support goals, but they cannot generate the reason those goals matter to a human life. As a result, individuals increasingly encounter a vacuum where struggle, uncertainty, and necessity once supplied direction. When effort is no longer required to survive or succeed at many tasks, motivation must be consciously chosen rather than imposed by circumstance. Work reflects this shift. Many roles remain important, but fewer feel existentially anchoring. People ask not what am I good at, but what is worth being good at. Prestige shifts away from raw productivity towards stewardship, mentorship, and contribution to shared narratives. Education systems respond by recentering philosophy, ethics, history, and the arts, not as luxuries but as stabilizing forces. Students are taught not just how to work with intelligent systems, but how to articulate values, commitments, and identities in a world where outcomes can be optimized, but meanings cannot. Culturally, storytelling regains prominence. Films, books, and long-form media explore themes of choice, restraint, legacy, and belonging. Audiences gravitate toward narratives that emphasize human interiority rather than spectacle. The question, what does it mean to live well, re-enters mainstream discourse. There is also pushback against constant optimization. Some communities deliberately adopt slower, less efficient modes of living, not out of opposition to AI, but as a way to preserve felt experience. Inefficiency becomes, in some contexts, a form of meaning-making. Technologists acknowledge the limits. Even the most advanced systems can only reflect human values back to us. They cannot decide which values deserve allegiance. This realization tempers earlier ambitions of total optimization. By the end of Q3 2030, society reaches a reflective pause. AI has helped humanity see farther, plan better, and coordinate more effectively than ever before. But it has also clarified something older and harder to resolve. No amount of intelligence can answer the question of what a human life is for. By the final quarter of 2030, the future no longer feels speculative. It feels inhabited. After 5 years of rapid adaptation, negotiation, resistance, and reflection, societies arrive at a new equilibrium with artificial intelligence. Not a stable endpoint. There is no such thing, but a lived arrangement. AI is no longer a novelty, a threat, or a promise. It is a condition of civilization. Technically, the pace of visible change slows. Capabilities continue to improve, but incrementally. The dramatic leaps of the late 2020s give way to refinement, better robustness, lower energy use, clearer boundaries, tighter integration with human institutions. The focus is no longer on what AI can do, but on how reliably it can be trusted to do it over time. Institutions look different now. Governments govern with simulation and foresight baked into their processes. Economies assume continuous coordination by intelligent systems. Education treats AI as an intellectual environment rather than a tool. None of this feels radical anymore. It feels administrative. Social life adapts in quieter ways. People plan their lives knowing that uncertainty has shrunk in some dimensions and expanded in others. Some risks are better managed. Others, cultural, existential, moral, remain stubbornly human. The absence of catastrophe does not feel like victory, but like responsibility. Importantly, humanity has not ceded agency entirely. Over the previous years, societies have drawn lines, sometimes clumsily, around what must remain human. These boundaries are imperfect and contested, but they exist. They express values, not efficiency. Children grow up assuming intelligent systems are always present, but also learning that some choices require human judgment precisely because they are difficult. The lesson is subtle. Intelligence can guide action, but it cannot absolve responsibility. At a civilizational level, AI becomes understood as infrastructure for thought, analogous to language, writing, or mathematics. Transformative, yes, but ultimately shaped by how humans choose to live with it. Looking back to 2026, the fear was disruption. Looking forward from 2030, the challenge is maintenance. Maintaining alignment. Maintaining legitimacy. Maintaining meaning in a world where intelligence is abundant, but purpose is not. The age of artificial intelligence does not end with domination or collapse. It settles into something quieter. A long coexistence, unfinished, imperfect, and unmistakably human.